The former top cop of the Metropolitan Police, Lord Bernard Hogan-Howe, says it's time to get back to traditional policing. That's how you deal with petty criminals, that's how you bring down knife crime, and he's got some very interesting things to say about the Lucy Connolly case.
So words matter, and if you allow this sort of thing to get out of hand, and we saw what happened, we end up with riots. Very serious, people get hurt in riots, they risk losing their life, lose property.
Lord Bernard Hogan-Howe joins us now. Welcome to the Daily Tea. Lovely
Thanks
to
for inviting me in. Great to see you both.
We're always on our best behaviour when former top cops come in.
I've noticed you keep your hands to the table and keep your arms folded. It's all very, very
keep
defensive.
ourselves in the very
always
best
sticking
of
to
order.
the speed limit.
But it's usually the other way around. You're asking me questions. I've spent a career journalists asking me questions and trying to explain things that I can't always explain.
But you have also spent a career interrogating criminals.
Yes.
So you must be quite good at asking your own questions. Where were you on the night of?
Yeah, and it's I think one thing that might link journalism and policing is that we've all probably got an interest in human behaviour, and
Yes.
I'm always fascinated. Each crime, of course, it's interesting because there's been a victim and the suspect. You're trying to prove who did it, but equally, every crime has got a story. There's always something there that you need to understand, a series of coincidences or events in somebody's life that I just find fascinating, and then you've got to try and prove something by, as you know, getting evidence and making sure it sticks.
There's actually quite a close correlation, isn't there, between our investigations team and I would say police investigating crimes or investigating stories and all the rest of it. And we will get on to the reason why you're here in just a moment. But can we ask you a few kind of general questions about the state of policing in the UK today? There was a survey carried out in October 2024 which revealed that 52%, this was done by YouGov, said they had no or not very much confidence in the police to tackle crime locally. And that compared with 39% who had a negative view in October 2019. So in those 5 years, it seems as if people have lost faith in the force a bit. And that may be because of reports of shoplifters going unpunished or petty crimes going uninvestigated and unsolved. It could be even a reaction to bigger and more serious crimes like Manchester Arena bombings, Southport and all the rest of it. But what's your impression, Bernard?
I think I understand why people's confidence has gone down. I mean, partly it's post-COVID, I think, that when all public services started doing it from home. And so you ended up where the police weren't attending as many crimes. I think you got a post-2008 effect, I would say. So, we had the banking crisis and all public service took a haircut, apart from health and education. So policing lost about 20,000 cops. So I think the combined effect was that the police attended less crimes. I would say that they should attend all crimes. That would be my view. So I think that happened, and some of it we can, for the reason I've just explained, we might understand. But I think the sad reality is it's continued. So, that the police have not been attending things like shoplifting. I mean, there was a change in prosecutions policy, I think about 2012, that said that shoplifting below £200 generally wouldn't be prosecuted. Now, if you make that sort of change, the police are going to respond, because each shoplifter probably takes about 6 hours to deal with. There's all that paperwork. To what end? But that doesn't excuse for me. I understand why that changes the dynamic, but it doesn't excuse not going. If you go, I mean, first of all, you've got shop assistants who've got to confront these people. And if you don't go, I can guarantee you won't detect it. If you do go, there's a chance. I think at the very least, I've always felt that people should reasonably expect a professional service that attends, cares, listens. If they can do something, do it. I don't think the public expect you to be Superman or woman. They don't expect you to solve every crime. But they do expect you to care, and they do expect you to take, do your reasonable efforts to try and find it. And you hear too many examples where there has been evidence and lines of inquiry that haven't been pursued. So I think that's one of the big reasons that has changed that feeling that people have. I mean, we don't know exactly why they've lost confidence, but I think that's a big part of it.
Traditionally, people have wanted visibility from the police. It's often put as bobbies on the beat. Do you think that there should be more bobbies on the beat so that people can see that the police are there, even though we interviewed Neil Basu very recently, obviously one of the most senior anti-terrorism police officers in the UK, and he said the actual evidence might be that putting more bobbies on the beat doesn't actually cut crime, but the fact is the public want to see police officers on the streets in their localities, so therefore we should do it. Do you think we should be putting more bobbies on the beat?
Definitely. I'd agree with Neil. What you can't do, I think, is, and people will understand that you can't put a police officer on every street corner. Not every street can be patrolled. But for me, you've got to patrol the areas where there's the biggest footfall. Shopping areas, town centres. This is waving the lamp a bit. But, when I started, then, I don't know, on a shift of probably about 20-odd people, the probationers, people like myself, when we started, we would be given the footbeats in the town centre or in the shopping precincts. So that's where lots of people were. And people did come and talk to you. They were, I think, reassured by that. And some times here in central London, I don't see many cops walking. And one of the consequences is that you start getting open drug dealing, for example.
Open drug taking, actually.
We're sat in Victoria.
Yes.
And we see it.
Yes.
And that's got to be challenged. And I'm afraid if you're driving past, you don't see it. Last night I went out for a meal, not far from here, and I'm pretty sure I saw somebody who came out of a shop, sold some drugs, and then the guy went off his electric scooter. Now, of course, you're not going to catch every one of those, but you've got to have a reasonable presence so that you notice the unusual, you challenge the unusual, and I'm afraid I think it's been deprioritised. So the way that policing is developed is obviously two big things. First of all, there's a bigger population over a bigger geography. Towns have grown, and so it's getting harder and harder to get that coverage on foot. And the second thing is demand. I'm not sure crime has gone up, but demand has gone up because we've all got a mobile phone. It makes the police available, every public service available. Not like when I was at home, my mum would have to, if you got antisocial behaviour, she went to the phone box at the end of the street, which didn't work. So you didn't get many calls about antisocial. She sorted it out, as it happens. She would sort it out herself. So the police didn't get to know as often about as many of the things that were happening. Now they do. So that combination means you've got bigger geography, more people, and you've got more reports. So I understand why it's become more mobile. I think we all can understand that, because when it's an emergency, you expect the cops now, not in 2 weeks' time. But that's no excuse for me for saying you can't go to some of these jobs on foot, and you can't go a bit later to some of the lower priority jobs. It is no excuse for saying I'm not coming. I just don't accept. And there's just a final thing I would say on it. One of the things that people can say is, look, there's just too much crime to respond to. You can't go to every crime. I don't think that's accurate. Here in London, big city, 9 million people, another 2 million visitors a day. There are about something the order of 1 million crime a year. Now it flexes. It's a lot of crime. But if you divide it by 365, by 24, which is the number of days and hours, but then you divide it by 32 boroughs, it's actually on average 3 crimes per hour per borough. And we're sat in Westminster. It's not 10,000 crimes an hour. So, of course, crime is not all that the police do. Everybody understands that. They do football stuff, they deal with sudden deaths, road traffic. I won't make the list, but it's about probably a third of what they do. But it's not such a big number that it's I would say it's impossible for officers to attend and at least try and make some difference. And the more serious crimes are always going to attract more resources, murders, rapes. You would expect that these are things that probably you're going to put teams into. So I do worry that, I understand, to Kamal's first question, why that confidence might have shifted.
Isn't it time to get back to what might be described as traditional policing?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you've got to try and. It's not easy. In anything I'm saying, I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that it's easy. Here in London, there's probably about 34,000 cops. Sounds a lot until you divide it by 4 shifts, days off, all the rest of it. You deal with murder, you deal with fraud, and all the other things, counter-terrorism. So the numbers gradually, get more and more pressure put on them. It's not straightforward, but I've always thought that if you can target resources where they're going to have most effect, and we talked already about foot patrol in the high footfall areas, if you can target areas where we know that repeat victim theory says that about 10% of locations, victims or suspects can account for about 2/3 of crime. That's probably not surprising to some people who live in high crime areas. Sadly, the suspects target their neighbours. So you find that if you target those areas with a higher amount of resources, you can have an impact. I don't think you're ever going to stop crime, but you can have a disproportionate impact given that you're never going to have 10,000 officers per street. That's just, there's a limit to resourcing. So I think the way through it is to smartly apply the resources, and then, like the health service, you do have to ration at times. But I don't think rationing means if you've got a bad heart, you never get treatment. It means you might have to allow the person who's just had a heart attack to have it now, the treatment, whereas somebody who's got a longer term chronic condition might get it in 2 months' time. So I think the police have got to do that. There are some things which I think people accept. Okay, I'm okay if you come in 2 days' time. It's not urgent. The offender's not still here. I'll keep the evidence. There are times when you can negotiate and have an appointment. That's not a problem. But I don't think people like it when the offender is still around. It's a serious event for that person. I'd expect the cops to come.
The other thing that's changed policing dramatically is the advent of the internet, the emergence of the smartphone and social media. You said earlier you think that police should investigate all crimes. Mindful of the Lucy Connolly case, which I'm sure you're across, and the fact that her appeal against her sentence of 31 months for that admittedly hateful tweet in the midst of the Southport riots, mindful of that, should the police be investigating so-called hurty words?
For me, generally, no. I think that, abuse is not pleasant. But I think of itself, it's not sufficient. Causing an offence is not sufficient for the police to get involved. And frankly, they're going to drive themselves crackers if they try and police the internet. It's just the volume of it that is massive. So I think we've got to come to an agreement that, abuse alone is not sufficient. So there's got to be some aggravating factor. I mean, the Lucy Connolly case, to be fair, I think, as you've already said, Camilla, is pretty awful stuff that this woman put out.
But she deleted it, and many people have said the sentence was just disproportionate.
Well, I think
rapists and people inciting other hatred have got less.
Well, I mean, it's now gone to the Court of Appeal who tried to do some standardisation. I'm not surprised they came to the conclusion they have, but you could argue it might be a bit less. You could have argued for a suspended sentence. I don't think this woman had ever committed an offence before. You could have said, well, it's very unlikely she does again, but if she does offend, then she'll go back to prison for 2 years. You could argue for that. The difficulty I can see for the judges is that it was put in the category of a 1A offence. Right? It was the most serious of that type of offence. And even the defence accepted it was. Her own lawyer accepted it was, and she pleaded guilty to this offence, knowing that was the gravity of the offence. I think actually it was slightly before the riot started. It was on the day of the murder, if you remember. And it was horrible. I mean, there is a specific offence. This wasn't it. This wasn't the offence she was charged with. But people do forget, you can't just say what you like. In a free country, we can all say what we like, but there can be consequences sometimes. For example, you can't threaten to murder somebody, intending that they believe it. If you do, you can go to prison for 10 years. So words matter. And if you allow this sort of thing to get out of hand, and we saw what happened, we end up with riots. Very serious, people get hurt in riots, they risk losing their life, lose property. I think unless you challenge that behaviour, and we know that generally deterrence works in only a couple of occasions. First of all, the certainty of detection means that people don't commit offences. But the other one is research shows that when you get big public disorder, if you get serious sentences at the beginning of the disorder, it diminishes that disorder, doesn't stop it, but it reduces it and slows it down. So I can see why they've taken it seriously. You could argue for less, and I said I could see why they could argue for a suspended sentence, but I suspect that the context, i.e. this awful crime that happened, these 3 children that got murdered, and then the riots that followed, meant the judiciary were sending a message, and you can't say they were wrong to do that.
But to just build on what Camilla said, are sentences for tweets of 31 months in prison proportionate? Do you have any sympathy with those who criticise Lucy Connolly's sentence when people are being released from prison early because the prisons are overcrowded for what many would say are far more heinous crimes of actual physical assault? Do you have any sympathy with those who say there is two-tier justice here?
Well, sure, it's two-tier justice, but I understand that argument. I can see why people make that argument. I think even though this tweet was deleted quickly, relatively quickly, a few hours, 3 hours, I think within that time there have been 370,000 views. That's a lot of impact. And I don't use social media myself, but I'm surprised at how one individual got so much viewing so quickly. So if they knew they got that reach, it was quite a big impact. And there was a call to burn people in buildings. Now, this is pretty awful stuff, and it was racist. It was aimed at people of certain groups. So I don't see how society can ignore that. But when you start to compare, I think for me the point of differentiation might be that you might find circumstances where I think if you could have seen a suspended sentence as a possibility in this case, because I wonder whether if it hadn't been for the riots that might have happened.
Yes, we were discussing that earlier.
But I think the riots, if the judges do get caught both ways, and I'm not here to defend them, I've criticised them myself sometimes, but to be fair, they do get caught both ways. If at a time of riots they don't send us clear message, they say we've been soft and they'll keep coming back. And I would think the fact that three court of appeal judges with huge experience of doing this thing have confirmed the sentence, and I think they said in their judgment something like, okay, at the margins you could argue for slightly less, but what they didn't say, they shouldn't have been in imprisonment. So I think it's a serious thing, and I understand why people make the comparisons, but I can't sit here and criticise them.
We should just mention that our sister podcast, Planet Normal, presented by Alison Pearson and Liam Halligan. Alison, of course, has been incredibly powerful on this issue of Lucy Connolly and has spoken to Lucy Connolly herself after the Court of Appeal judgment. Do have a listen to that special episode, which we're also publishing this week.
On Stop and Search, Lord Hogan-Howe, the knife crime rate has shot up in London since you left office, and that's coincided with the London Mayor Sadiq Khan voicing a lot of scepticism about the effectiveness of Stop and Search. What's your view on it?
I think Stop and Search can play a part. We actually reduced Stop and Search while I was there and arrested more people because we did it better, I think. We improved our accuracy of searching, and we tried to improve the way it was done because we got some good officers who could find stolen stuff and knives and drugs. They were intuitively good, and they did it well. They arrested a lot of people, and they didn't get complaints. So there is a good way to do it. I think the future ought to be 2 or 3 things I've argued for. I think one is that I think Stop and Search is a useful tool, but it's not the only one. But if you're going to improve its efficiency, first of all, we need better technology. And there is technology starting to be developed because actually you are carrying a knife. Not we're randomly searching you, not that we think you've got a bulge in your jacket or whatever. This is something that would be very high likely to say you have actually got a knife and I'm going to search you for that. So this is improving the way the officer works. I always thought that the second part of technology could be that, one of the things I did before I left, we gave every police officer on the street body-worn video. Now the first one was first generation. Basically it recorded what you said and did. It was a camera. But for me to put some facial recognition on that, so that then what would happen is, one of the things that worries me, when I as an officer might stop someone and say, can you tell me your name? I'm immediately indicating I don't know an awful lot about you. So the next question is, well, why have you stopped me? So I think if you can get technology to say, look, Camilla, you're on bail. Mm-hmm. You'd be on bail for carrying a knife. That's why I'm stopping you.
Yes.
And I would like to see whether you're carrying a knife now, because one of your conditions of bail. So you start to get the officer far better informed by the use of technology. I think the final one that we've never got on top of, and I tried this, and I'm afraid I failed. My belief has always been, it's not a secret who carries knives. It can be a secret who's carrying it now, but their mums know, their brothers know, the rest of the mates know, because they're terrified of them, because they always like to turn it on them. The question is, will they tell the police? And that hasn't been the history. And as importantly, that the police once gained the information that my whoever, mate, or even somebody you've fallen out with, has just got on the tube and go and find him now, not in 2 weeks' time, but now, that the ability of the police to respond quickly and go and catch them carrying that knife now. So the two things, and we tried to do it with Crime Watch, we tried to do it with Crime Stopper, so that you had a special route. People could do it anonymously if they wanted. And also that we allowed mums to do it, because if you are convicted on a second occasion beyond the age of 17 for carrying a knife, you will go to prison. You should go to prison for a minimum of 6 months. So a second conviction. So my thought was that if you'd said to mums, look, there's going to be a consequence, but it won't end up them being murdered or somebody else being hurt. So it's best that you let us know. But we can almost guarantee they won't go to prison that first time. There will be a consequence. So I think if you can develop some scheme to get the information from the public, tell us who's carrying them, get out there and take it off them. So the combination of technology and improved intelligence, I think, can make a a real difference. And then the final thing, you have got to consider the penalties and make sure that the penalties deter so far as penalties do deter. But as I said earlier, without detection, deterrence doesn't work.
You started your career in 1979, South Yorkshire Police. You were the Chief Constable in between 2004 and 2009 of Merseyside Police, obviously the head of the Met Police. In your career, were you aware of what's now become described as the Grooming Gangs scandal? And I just wondered what your response is to those who are demanding there should be a national inquiry into the behaviour of mainly Pakistani heritage men abusing in the most horrific ways, often young, white, working class women.
Certainly I didn't hear about it when I was in South Yorkshire. Can't say I heard about it in Merseyside, although Merseyside is not a very diverse place. People imagine it is, but I think the minority population is about 2%. It's very low. So I can't say I'd heard about it before we all heard about it with the inquiry.
And nothing in London. There didn't seem to be any evidence that this was happening.
It doesn't seem to. What I don't know, whether anybody's ever looked at this, is whether the more you are a minority, the more this happens, or if you've got your larger minorities who, the networks look after each other, whether that makes a difference, I just don't know. But certainly I'd not heard about it before we all discovered about it. In terms of should be there an inquiry, I'm not sure. I mean, I think the proposal is at the moment that there's going to be local inquiries, and we've already had one inquiry. I think the government is saying, well, that one inquiry was the one that did their best, and now we're trying to act on their recommendations. So why are we having another one? And you have to wonder, is there a political element to it? And I'm not in a position to judge. So I think at the moment the evidence is not clear there should be another one, because we've already had one. But I wouldn't be against it if they decided to.
Another story that's been prominent in the headlines has been the case of Chris Kaba. He was shot dead by an armed police officer in 2022. That officer, Sergeant Martin Blake, was cleared of his murder last year. And now the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC, now wants Sergeant Blake to face a hearing for gross misconduct. What's your reaction to that decision?
No, I disagree with it. And in fact, we've talked about, I have a podcast and we've talked about in one of the episodes. I mean, for me, this is a pretty special group of people. If you bear in mind in this country, there's nearly 60 million people. And on our behalf, there's about 6,000 of us who can go forward and use a firearm. You can't do it. I can't do it. So we rely on this 6,000. Pretty special group. They rarely discharge their weapons. This 6,000, I mean, they attend quite a lot of incidents, but they probably discharge their weapons in this country, I don't know, something like 10 times. In a year. So there's no evidence they're trigger happy. They obviously injure less than 10, and sometimes people die. I think the most in one year was 6. That was an exceptional year. It's usually 1, 2, sometimes none. So I think all the evidence is they're a pretty good group of people who are responsible, go to work that day, do the job, and then they have that momentary decision to make within a fraction of a second about whether they're going to shoot somebody or get shot, quite often. So I think they're pretty remarkable. In this case, I mean, the trial had taken 2-3 weeks, and the jury took 3 hours to clear. I mean, even if you're just going through the evidence, it takes at least 3 hours. So I think it's fairly clear that what the jury felt about it, they don't give reasons. And then to compound it, then we end up with a gross misconduct charge. And if you looked at the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, press release, they say almost they had no choice. There was no discretion because there was this criminal charge. And they're indicating that it's on the same facts on which the criminal charge was brought because the misconduct standard is lower. I just don't get that. If they would, I think there can be grounds sometimes for saying the misconduct charge should follow. Say the officer misled or been dishonest in the process. Say they did not follow the standard operating procedure. They should have had a catch-on and they didn't, and didn't cause the death. But they breached an internal disciplinary issue. There can be times when a misconduct process might be acceptable. But in this, on the IOPC's own explanation, I don't understand it. And the compound effect, I think it was 2022 when the officer shot Chris Kaba dead. Here we are in 25. It's going to be at least another year. So he's going to be under inquiry for 4 to 5 years, I suspect. And not only him, his family, for doing what the Crown Court's already established was legal. It's not a good outcome. I mean, nobody wants anybody to die, and we know now know a lot about Chris Kaba's background, but that doesn't justify anybody dying. That's not the point. But it does explain why people might have regarded that vehicle particularly as being having somebody in it who was dangerous. So I think the officers have got to make these very quick decisions. In this case, the vehicle was being used as a weapon. Everybody accepts that vehicle was quite a big vehicle that's been moved about, and the officer took that action to discharge the weapon. But I don't think he deserves this 4 or 5 years of inquiry. And so I think the final thing for me, I would say, is two things for the future rather than this case as well. Is that one, there should be some time limits. You know, for a committal for a murder, there's a time limit of 100 days. This is from the point of charge to the point of first appearance at court. Well, why is this taking so long? And the second one, I would say, is that we need to give some comfort in law to the firearms officers. And what I mean by that is that if as a household you're at home, somebody breaks in and you injure them, defending yourself, your family and your property, then there's a higher standard or a higher level before you'll be prosecuted. And my question is, why can't firearms officers be in that position too? Not to give immunity. I've known times somebody who's reckless or somebody who's malicious. That's not the point. That should not happen. But I think to give more consideration about that momentary human decision, and in most cases, well, I think in every case where an officer's been charged, a jury's concluded that they were not guilty because they're just reasonable. They're only human beings. They aren't super people. They've just got to do on our behalf what we can't do.
Bernard Hogan-Howe, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea. As you say, you have a new podcast called Crime Scene with the former Mirror editor Alison Phillips. Do go and find that on wherever you listen to your podcast. But it's been great to have you on this podcast.
Thank you, and thanks for having a nice conversation. I think one of the things we're trying to offer, and as I suspect you are, is that an opportunity for people to share their opinion, uninterrupted at times, not to go on forever, but a chance for them to explain their point of view and then be challenged to see whether or not you agree.
Discursive, not combative, is how we put it, Bernard. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.